In this episode, we're going to address the age-old question, should I buy a house or an apartment? Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information. Today, we're talking about the pros and cons of buying an apartment instead of a house for your first home. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about apartments, strata property, body corporate, these community title schemes in general. And we want to clear a lot of these up for you so that you can make better decisions.
But before we get into that, for those of you who watch, you'll know what I'm talking about here. And when I say watch on YouTube, Meighan has a lovely home behind her in the background, and it absolutely, I don't know, it's weird. I'll give you that. I don't hate it as much as...
Only single story. Let's give them a hint. It's only a single story.
It looks like it's carved out of a cave.
It does look a bit rocky, doesn't it?
Out of all the properties that you have behind you, this is one that I actually don't hate. So tell us about it.
Well, this one, as I am finding many of these unique and crazy houses are located in California again. So they seem to be, seems to be where people have a lot of money and they don't want to stick to the rules. They really want to be creative. And this one is the Flintstone House. So it actually has been designed and built in Malibu in California. And internally, if you Google it, it's a hoot. It is a replica of Fred Flintstone's house from the Flintstones. And if you remember that cartoon, I loved it as a kid, watched it all the time. Barney Rubble and Fred and Wilma and Betty. Bam, bam,
Pebbles and Bam Bam.
Pebbles and Bam Bam. Yeah, no, I think there was a dinosaur pet. I can't remember his name. Anyway, that's the Flintstones house, and hope you enjoy finding a little bit more about it.
It's pretty impressive. It does look like a rock fell on a house, actually. A big flat stone fell on a house, but no.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Okay, so that's if you're going to buy a house. That could be one of your options. If you're going to buy apartments, maybe not quite an option that you'd be looking at.
That's creativity, but I have found one for a future episode that is a crazy looking set of apartments. I can't wait to show you that one.
Well, stay tuned. One of the first questions that we get after the where should I buy question is, well, should I buy a house or an apartment? And certainly when you've got rising property prices and increasing unaffordability, or is it decreasing affordability? They're both true. First home buyers are faced with this real challenge of, well, do I save for longer and watch prices get out of my reach, maybe never buy anything, or do I get in now? Do I buy an apartment? Do I do the stepping stone? And if you want to learn about stepping stone, we do have the stepping stone strategy tutorial that you can download. But anyway, that's another thing. So let's talk about, I guess, really there are pros and cons, both houses and apartments. So
Veronica, this is part of a bigger question. So I want to give some context around this question, because it isn't a question that you can answer in isolation. And it actually is part of the where should I buy question. It is one of the components of the where should I buy question. We talk about the compromises that you need to make. And when you're working out where you should buy, there's sort of three components to that. There's the position, there's the property, and there's the price. And those three things, when you put them all together, that's your recipe, your mix, if you like, of what you should be looking at. And the house versus apartment question, that's a really big one that is part of the where should I buy, because there's pros and cons, as you say, to each of these things, but just making a decision on whether it's a house or an apartment in isolation without thinking about, well, where could the house be, or where could the apartment be, or what do I need out of a property, or how much budget do I have, and is that fixed or limited? It's part of the bigger question, but I guess what we're trying to do here is arm people with a lot more information that's independent of some of those scary things like, oh, don't buy an apartment because you'll have to pay strata levies and, they're so expensive. We really want people to have, step back and have some really reliable independent information to then say, or maybe it's an apartment in this place or it's a house in that place, which is part of the where to buy, answer to the where to buy question. So let's have a look. I know that you certainly do in Sydney a lot more buying of apartments than we do in Brisbane. We do a lot more on the housing side. So take us through some of the apartment pros.
Yeah, and certainly, and the reason, of course, that Sydney is more of an apartment market is because as locations become more expensive, and look around the world, look at, as land becomes more expensive, as land becomes scarcer, as more people live in a smaller area of land, then developers are forced to actually come up with ways to house more people on smaller blocks of land, and apartments is a really good solution. Yeah. So, you think about
density increases closer to the city, the bigger the city is.
Absolutely. So, of course, it makes perfect sense that there is more apartment options, or more likelihood that apartment will be an option for you, is probably a better way of saying it, in Sydney than, say, in Brisbane, where obviously there's still more land around, and land is a bit less expensive than in Sydney.
And certainly regionally, there's far fewer apartments regionally than there are in the capital cities for that reason.
Yeah. So where it's located is really key. So buying an apartment in a regional centre may not be so smart, or buying an apartment in Brisbane for that same rationale may not be as smart, whereas buying a property in Sydney may be smart. Certainly buying a property in Melbourne is still a little bit fraught, to be honest, because they're still suffering a real oversupply issue and the impact on that as a city as a whole. But there are still some of these principles at play. And if you bear these in mind when you're looking, if you decide to look for an apartment, then it's going to help you in Melbourne as well. Yeah. So one of the big pros from apartments is that lower price point. And
generally speaking,
that lets you get into the market earlier. So,
and when we say lower price point, Veronica, what we mean by that is that if you're looking at a house in the same suburb with similar features, 2 bed, 1 bath, say, on house in a small block versus an apartment, the apartment is going to be and should be cheaper in that location. So it's a more affordable entry point in a similar location.
Or you might even be able to afford an apartment with more bedrooms and in better condition than a house in that location. So you could get a 3-bedroom apartment, for example, whereas you might be buying a really small house that you would outgrow the house quicker than you would outgrow the apartment. Sometimes that's a good reason to look at an apartment, depending on the location.
Good point. Yeah.
The other thing with apartments is that there is that potential, because it's that sort of if you are looking at the stepping stone strategy, right? Then there is potential, depending on your own future income capacity or potential, is the potential to keep that property as an investment when you upgrade. So it might be that the first property you buy, you don't intend to sell. And obviously you do need to get good advice from an accountant if you're going to, and a mortgage broker in terms of structuring if you're going to do this. But that is more of an option than it would be if you were to buy a house first.
Do you mean because, okay, let's just pull that apart a little bit, because I think there's some underlying things there, some assumptions there that we need to sort of tease out a little bit. So you're talking about not stretching yourself as much for the first one if it's going to become an investment property down the track?
Well, I mean, so some people, for instance, are on the beginning of their career trajectory, try saying that fast, and they know, or they're single and they know that, they'd like to couple up at one point, or they know that with whatever they're doing for a job, like a doctor's a classic example, right? A doctor starts off in pretty low income compared to what they will ultimately earn. And once they specialise, they know they're going to be earning big bucks. right? So, I mean, this is one extreme, of course. And so, therefore, early on, they still want to be in the property market. They still want to buy something, but they do know that they will be able to afford quite a lot better down the track. So, they might buy an apartment that suits them now with a view to keeping that and holding that as an investment property down the track when they upgrade, rather than having to sell it to upgrade, where most people would. So apartment does give a little bit more flexibility on that score, because apartments, I think, from an investment point of view, in terms of managing that as a building, as a property, you've got two extra layers of management, or sorry, one extra layer of management. You have a property manager and a strata manager looking after your investment for you. And if you've got a busy career and all the rest of it, there's real advantages in having that type of investment or type of property as an investment. So it all comes down to, of course, it's got to be, I mean, there's so many caveats in everything we say.
Yes. So don't take this as gospel. Remember, there's certain assumptions and caveats, and certainly if you're going to use an apartment as a stepping stone strategy, you have to be very careful that you're making an investment-based decision,
yes,
not a personal preference-based decision. So that's a really different mindset if you're choosing your first property as an apartment to be a future investment property.
And it's funny because we're having this conversation on Zoom, and I'm looking at Meighan's face going, she's thinking, what is she going to say? Where are you going with this, Monica?
We have really different investment philosophies because of the markets we work in.
Yeah, where we live.
And that's appropriate. Yeah. That is appropriate because in Sydney, it's higher density. People have a set budget or certain budgets they can push to. So it's about finding investment grade in that location that allows for, the right set of features of the property, the right location, the right budget. In Brisbane, for similar types of money, similar proximity to the city, you're looking at a house. So, my investment philosophy when I'm talking to people is very much about the land content. So we're not talking just about apartments, I'm going to keep banging on. It is location specific, some of this advice. And that's what's really, really important. This is what we want to drum home to everybody is, it's part of the bigger question, it's not just house or apartment, because there's pros and cons in different locations to each of those different asset types.
And this is really top level we're talking here. We're not talking specific to anybody's circumstances. We're really just trying to flesh out some of these ideas so that you can think bigger before you actually make your final decision. There's certainly a lot more flexibility with owning a property in the idea that you can lock up and leave. And so,
an apartment.
If you move overseas, if you have an interstate opportunity or an overseas opportunity, along the sort of lines of what I was just saying there, potential to keep it as an investment, it's sort of easier to manage because you've got two sets of eyes on it in terms of your property manager and your strata manager looking after the building.
Generally in a secure building, where there's other people close by, keeping an eye on things.
Absolutely. They're also easier to renovate. When I say easier, there are some logistical constraints, and also you have an additional layer of approval that is required, i.e. Strata have to, the owners corporation have to approve anything that you want to change, and potentially council as well, but they are more contained. So you've got constraints, but you've also, it's contained as well in terms of what you can do.
Sort of cosmetic, isn't it? Within the floor plate or the existing layout with maybe some very minor structural changes. But as you say, that may require council certification or private certification, as well as getting the owners corporation or the body corporate's approval for any of those sorts of things. And the sorts of things we're talking about there is if you're changing the flooring. In a house, you could choose to have polished floorboards, you might choose to have tiles, you have carpet. Nobody needs to approve that. But in a complex where you've got people above, people below, people beside, noise, the way that noise travels is an important factor to take into consideration, and how you soundproof and the flooring that you use will have a big impact on other people. So those sorts of things have to be approved by the other people who live in that complex, which is the owners corporation or body corporate.
Even the logistics of getting materials in and out, lifts and stairwells and skip bins and all that sort of stuff. It is logistically more difficult, but the actual, like you say, it's more cosmetic. So you can value add in an apartment a lot quicker and easier and cheaper than with a house, because with a house, there's always something extra. It's
once you
expensive.
pull something off, you find something else, and suddenly it's like the wool on the bottom of your jumper, and you go, what's that thread? And you start pulling it, and the jumper starts slowly unraveling. The first time you do a renovation, it honestly feels like that. How
Yeah.
How am I going to stop the unraveling of the
I didn't know that is like the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone. It's like that's like renovating a house. All right. And look,
and can be as expensive.
Yeah. So the shared costs. I mean, the good thing about apartments is that if the roof leaks, if we're talking about in a house, you start unraveling it and you find that that leak is causing that problem leaks, and so on. It's all 100% on you. Whereas if the roof leaks in an apartment building or there's something that goes wrong, you do those costs are amortized amongst all of the owners in that complex. So
according to your allotment or entitlement. So whatever your voting rights are, that's your percentage share that you would have to contribute to the additional costs that weren't otherwise accounted for in the forecast.
Yeah. And, talk about location. I mean, Meighan was really pointing that out, how important that is when in this whole conversation, and it's massively relevant. But, and this is the thing, you get the opportunity to live closer to the action, generally speaking,
absolutely.
in an apartment.
Yeah, for the same money. If you're just weighing up location as one of your key drivers in those three decisions, location, property price, position. If position is really important, you want to be, you love going to the opera, or you really love the nightlife. For us, it's Fortitude Valley. That would be, you're not going to get a house as a first home buyer around Fortitude Valley, New Farm, Newstead sort of areas. It's going to be an apartment, but there's a lot more density there, so you've got a lot more to choose from. So if that's a driver, then you can absolutely afford to be within walking distance to your favourite nightclub or pub.
But it's not all pros. There's definitely some cons. And I think with apartments, there is more chance that you'll outgrow it quicker. And you certainly can't add a story on.
No, they're much harder to rejig and create extra rooms if suddenly you have an exciting addition to the family, or you couple up. If you've gone into a one-bedroom apartment because you wanted to be close to the action and you thought you were going to be single for your whole life, and one night out you meet the love of your life, and suddenly things turn, one turns into two, turns into three. You can outgrow that apartment very quickly, and even two-bedroom apartments you can outgrow pretty quickly, and you can't extend them in the way that you possibly could a house, subject to the ability to extend or add stories or add rooms, or there's structural sort of things. But there are limitations to how much you can actually improve an apartment.
Now, I've heard stories and I've seen it done where, in this older style, if you buy a top floor, you might get the rights to build into the roof, but they are absolutely the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
Look,
and maybe if you do love the location, you can buy the apartment next door and turn two bedrooms into a 4-bedroom. It's not unheard of, where people really love the location, but a lot of things have got to fall in your favour to be able to do that.
Oh, yeah. And, I've helped people buy the apartments next door and above and below before. And I have to say they have to pay over the odds for those properties, because they've got massive amount invested in getting it. And so in a way it sort of traps you as well. Like, it's great if it comes off, but it can be a bit
if the one
of a
next
trap.
door happens to come up for sale and that seller's motivated, you would probably want to go into that purchase anonymously, because they know that you're the person that's going to want to pay the most amount of money.
Oh, yeah. Now, another big con with apartments is that danger of oversupply. And Meighan, you were saying that around that Fortitude Valley, Newstead, New Farm area. It's a great area. I love that part of Brisbane.
Fabulous
like
lifestyle.
You say, West End is another. There's apartment building after apartment building.
Kangaroo Point. Yep, these places are easy to buy in because there is so much supply. I'm not talking about the large family size apartments. That downsizer family size apartment, 3-4 bedrooms, 2-3 bathrooms, 2-3 car accommodation. Those apartments are not oversupplied. But what is oversupplied, or really not sought after in Brisbane, is 2-bed, 2-bath apartments that are sort of investor stock, cookie cutter. Yep. There's heaps of those around. You can buy those really cheap, but you're not going to get, if this is a stepping stone, you're not going to get the capital growth that you need to actually be able to step into the next property. And as an investment, they're the only properties that aren't increasing in rental value at the moment, whereas we've got a lot of upward pressure on houses. So again, the kind of product or the kind of property that you're looking at, if there's too much of it and it's the wrong demographic or the wrong area for the demographic that wants to live there, then you really got to be questioning whether that's the right strategy.
Yeah. Strata fees. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, don't buy a strata because I don't want to buy strata fees. You know, they are a negative in the sense that you have less control and you have to pay them every quarter, and they are set by a committee or by, you know, the owners corporation or whatever.
Of which you would become part of. So you would be one of the votes in there, depending on your voting rights.
The plus side of that, it is a way to budget expenses. And so if you buy a home or a house, you have to, as we said earlier, anything goes wrong, it's 100% your responsibility. And you do still need to budget for that. You still need to insure the property. You need to actually pay those maintenance costs.
If your gutters block up, you've got 100% of it. Whereas, you know, there's some money in the sinking fund to deal with those sorts of things when you're paying strata fees or levies.
And that comes down to your due diligence as well. And we highly recommend you do your first home buyer guide, the course, because, you know, there is money in the sinking fund if the owners that have owned before you have all been responsible and done their thing. And that's another con of buying apartments. If the owners in the past have not been responsible and looked after the building properly and budgeted accordingly, you as a newcomer could find yourself with special levies paying for things that really you've had no say in. So that, you know, it's really, really, really important to do your due diligence. And, you know, when things do need to get fixed and upgraded, it will take longer.
Yes. Yeah. If there's damage to a garage door, or someone wants to put in some sort of different fence access to their courtyard, it has to go through the approval of the owners corporation or the body corporate. And if there isn't a meeting coming up, then a special discussion needs to be made, and this can take a long time. Pet approval, you can't blanket not approve pets in complexes in most states now. There is common law outcomes of cases that prevents that. But bylaws can state that pets can only, you know, it has to be a certain size and has to be approved by the body corporate. That can take a really long time. So if you do buy an apartment, think, yep, I'll turn it into investment property, have a tenant apply, and they've got a dog, it might take weeks to get approval from the owners corporation or the body corporate to actually allow that tenant to have that dog. Yeah.
So, and that and along with all the other rules that come with living in a community. And, you know, rules can be a good thing because they're designed to protect and basically make sure that it's a good environment for living in for everyone, you know, not just for a few. But some people don't like living with rules. So
one of the funniest ones that I wasn't aware of very early on in my career in real estate is that the bylaws can dictate what day you put your washing on the line. So certain, some complexes do not allow washing on balconies. So you have access to the external lines only on certain days. And if you're not home that day, you're working, whatever the case may be, you might miss your opportunity to hang your blankets and your sheets out. And none of us want a Chinese laundry inside our apartments because we've missed our washing day.
I mean, some rules that extend to the window covering. So they basically say everyone has to have, it's hideous if it's vertical blinds because it's so 1990s.
There were some bylaws that required that in some buildings at some point in time, were there? And they haven't been updated by the sound of it.
You think, and quite often I will look at a building and I'll look outside and see if there's a variety or not, But so that's a bit
whether you can put air conditioning in. So if it's an older complex and it doesn't have air conditioning, a telltale sign is that others have put air conditioning units on. They might be sitting on their veranda or balcony or attached to the side of the building. If there's none, you might really have to question and have a look in the bylaws and also the minutes from previous annual meetings. If someone has applied and been knocked back, and if that's a blanket policy of the body corporate, then, in Queensland, if you can't put air conditioning on, it's going to be a very hard one to live in, but also a hard one to rent.
So I think we could sort of sum a lot of that up by saying that one of the cons is that you need to know what you don't know in order to do the due diligence, because it's a whole new world out there, and it's a really, really, really important to get those things sorted out and understood before you commit. And then finally,
do you know, I'll just go back to one of the pros of that. If you are a person who does like to stick by the rules and you like other people to stick by the rules too, apartments do give you sort of a little bit of an internal policing opportunity as well. So
join the body corporate.
If you're unhappy about something, you can pop the bylaws into your neighbour's letterbox and say, just remember, you're not meant to be in the pool after 10 p.m.
Absolutely. Frustrated.
And then you can complain to body corporate if they don't. Yeah. Or the on-site manager.
Yeah. The final con is that typically, traditionally, they have had slower capital growth. Now, it's not to say that all apartments will grow at a slower rate than all houses. If you buy a really crappy house and you could have bought a really great apartment in the same location, then, you know, that a really great apartment can well grow in value better than the really crappy house. So you need to sort of understand that. But when you look at sort of macro data, a commonly accepted fact, even though there are exceptions to the rule, that typically there is lower rates of capital growth with apartments.
Yep. But if you choose well and you choose the right property in the right location, then you can still take advantage of some of the capital growth if the popularity is there in the future for that property.
And we'll drum on about scarcity. We always talk about scarcity. So it's all about that, avoiding that oversupply.
Future owner-occupier appeal. Remember that. Future owner-occupier appeal.
Those principles.
Let's talk about houses.
Houses, yes.
Because, of course, that's what I loved.
You love houses. You love timber houses even more.
I like timber houses with tin roofs and plenty of character. And, I digress, but that's my strategy. But certainly, we just bought for a financial advisor who recommends a number of investors our way, and it is always house on land, good land component. House doesn't need to generate a huge amount of income, but he's a massive believer in the land content, and that's where one of the advantages of having house on land is you actually own the land upon which the structure sits. It's a big one from a capital growth perspective because you can't reproduce land. Now we're talking about locations obviously where you're landlocked, not where there is ability to add more subdivisions or greenfield sites. That's not necessarily the pro of buying land there. You might be better off looking at an apartment closer to a city where there is scarcity. But one of the things that I really like about houses is, and this is how a house can grow with you, is the potential to extend. So you can cosmetically update what's there in a house if the bones are good, the layout is good, the airflow, the natural light, and so forth. You can look at, in Queensland, you lift a house up and you build another level underneath it, and suddenly you've got twice the floor area. And if you do that really well, you can actually add value in excess of just the capital growth that happens organically. In Sydney, I think often they're sitting on a concrete slab, so perhaps put a level on top or go out to the rear. So there are ways to extend houses subject to council approval in your local government area that can allow the house to actually grow with you.
Yeah, and there's more freedom to, within constraints of the council, of course. I mean, councils will always have development control plans and local environment plans that you've got to abide by. But there is more freedom to actually do your own thing with the house, and certainly on the inside of it, and, you can easily change your floors, as Meighan was saying before, you paint floor window coverings, the whole bit. There's a hell of a lot more creativity just in terms of what you do in your garden. And if you do want to play loud music all the time,
you just might have the police knocking on your door.
Cook really smelly fish on your barbecue, all that stuff that you're going to struggle to do in apartments. If you like eating that.
Even have a barbecue on your balcony. There are some bylaws that don't allow gas barbecues to be on balconies in apartment complexes. So, again, one of those really important things to understand before you enter into a body corporate or strata.
Don't forget that you've still got neighbours, but yeah, you don't want to alienate your neighbours. But yeah, you do have a hell of a lot more. You don't have those rules governing you in the same way. And look, obviously with a house, there's more flexibility to grow into that house, particularly as Meighan was talking before, the potential to extend. You've got more outdoor space. You've generally got more space, and that's back to that caveat. Earlier on, it's all about location. It's all about the options that present themselves and whether an apartment is better than a house. Typically, if you moved a bit further out, you're going to get a bit more space and all those sorts of things. So,
finding those right set of compromises in those three key areas: position, property, price.
Yeah.
Which one's immovable and which one is movable, and then what are the options? And we're going to get onto the cons of houses in a moment, obviously, but one of the things with owning a house is you can choose what you renovate, according to how your income's going. So you might buy a house that needs extension, needs renovation, needs, a new kitchen, needs a new bathroom, but has really good bones. It's reasonably livable as it is. But you might be someone who maybe is on commission. So you might get a bonus every month or every quarter or twice a year or once a year. And you can just kind of plan out your improvements according to how your money is flowing in to the property. But you've always got to make sure, obviously, that you have a budget for maintenance. So the unexpected things, you can plan out renovations and improvements, but you have to have that discretionary budget for maintenance. Plan out renovations, but budget for maintenance that you're not expecting, because the hot water system can break down at any time. The gutters can clog up. The downpipes can, tree roots can grow into your sewer system. These are all things that if you have an apartment, you don't have to worry about in a lot of cases, but with houses, you really do.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And remember our interview with Peter Maisie, the building inspector? I can't remember what episode that is. It's very early on.
One of the early ones.
10 maybe. And he said, look, basically a building starts deteriorating the minute it's finished. And so that is a house. So houses need to be maintained. And but you don't have to put quarterly amounts of money into the sinking fund or the capital works fund. You can choose how you want to budget for that as opposed to being dictated to. So what are some of the cons?
Episode 14, actually, that one with Peter.
Oh, good on you. Episode 14. Cons of houses.
Look, they're generally, if you're looking for a house in a similar location to an apartment, so if your position is pretty, rock solid, you really want to be in a certain location, generally they're going to be more expensive. A house on a piece of land is generally going to be more expensive than an apartment. So that's where moving the position or the location that you're looking in might give you a similar option for a house, in a similar price range to an apartment closer to the city. But I think one of the big things, Veronica, and you've touched on this a couple of times, is if anything goes wrong, 100% of it is your problem.
Yep.
100% of it. So if you're replacing a roof, and that might be 14 to 22,000, depending on the size of the roof, how many square meters it is. If you're replacing a roof, then you have got 100% of that, as opposed to an apartment where you only pay your percentage or lot entitlement as a contribution. And generally that's probably been budgeted in during the accumulation phase of the sinking fund or the capital works fund. So, that is a really big thing to think about with houses is, how is your cash flow? How much extra money do you have? How are you going to deal with unexpected maintenance or big ticket items if they come up?
Yes, and they do. And generally too, the houses are located further away from the CBD and the action for the same sort of money. So if you're going to buy further out and you're still loving the lifestyle and not thinking about kids in the short term, because kids do put a bit of a handbrake on that for a while.
They're expensive little things.
They're expensive little buggers. And if you add in babysitters so you can still go out, it even makes it even more expensive. So you aren't going to be frequenting the local pubs and wine bars quite the same once you have kids, and if that's not on the near horizon, then you got to realize that you're going to be foregoing that proximity and that sort of ease of having your social life on your doorstep for the same sort of money. So it is really
unless you like backyard barbecues with your friends, and then entertaining becomes easy.
Yeah. And this is the thing, though. It comes back to that. What's your circumstances? What's your requirements? What's right for you? And whereabouts are you living as well, and where do you want to live? So these are all individual decisions, but it's a fact.
Yep.
And then the last one.
And you pointed out earlier, the neighbours aren't governed by the same rules as strata neighbours. So they have to abide by the law, but there's no one there to actually help you if they're stepping outside what is reasonable. If the party is rocking on at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning every weekend and during the week, really your only avenue for complaint is to call the police. So that's where noise complaints sort of have to go to. If they're revving their car in the garage during the day, tinkering away, rebuilding an old Mustang in their garage, and there's no law that prevents them from doing that during the day, then you don't have that next level of kind of overseeing management, strata manager, on-site manager that you might have in an apartment complex. So you really have to have your negotiating skills really quite refined to deal with neighbours if you've got challenging ones.
Yeah, and I think that people underestimate, what a problematic neighbour can be, like a hoarder. If you're in a townhouse complex and the neighbour starts putting, shopping bags full of stuff out in the front porch and the pile starts getting higher and higher, well, the strata can step in and deal with that.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you're on a street and next door neighbour starts doing that, you got Buckleys of getting anything to happen there. Or if you got a dog, a yappy dog next door. That was perfect timing because I was going to talk about dogs. The dog next door starts barking the minute the owner goes out. They don't even know because they're out. They don't know what their dog does when they go out.
So true. Thanks, dog.
Anyway, so there you go. We hope that that's helped just give you that sort of helicopter view of pros and cons, houses versus apartments. It's not a blanket rule. And I think that's, if anything that we can teach you about anything to do with property, there are no blanket rule. Even our principles are not blanket rules, because even then there's basically an exception to every rule.
Certainly is. In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first-time buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.